Believe it or not, this is the new Audi Q7. Okay, yeah, you're right. It's not exactly a new generation. Audi's first SUV is actually still in its second generation, almost a decade after it went on sale. But there have been some design tweaks and tech changes that hope to keep this big SUV in line with its rivals. So, is it up to the task?
4 variants are available in the Q7 lineup, excluding the performance-bent SQ7. Well, actually, at the time of the launch event, one of those was yet to arrive, that being the new entry-grade Q7 45 TFSI, which starts from $108,815 before on-roads. It's joined by a diesel-powered 45 TDI, which starts from $117,284, but entry-grade for the Q7 doesn't mean skint on goodies. Leather-appointed upholstery with the heated electrically adjustable front seats, an electric folding third row, wireless phone charging, screens and tech galore. There's plenty to like in the Q7, but the full features are detailed at the written review at carsguide.com.au. Stepping up from the 45s are the 50 TDI S-Line and 55 TFSI S-Line, both from $136,815. They gain things like 21-inch wheels, an S-Line exterior pack, ambient lighting, and a Bang & Olufsen sound system. Pricing for the Q7 remains very close to what it was even about a year ago, which means the updated SUV is a pretty good proposition.
Like I said before, you might have noticed this looks an awful lot like the Q7 used to, but there are a few things that you can sort of pick out to be able to tell between the pre and post facelift. For a start, there's the grille. It's more hexagonal than before. All those vertical lines that you used to see on the Q7 are kind of gone. The whole front of the car actually looks a lot more aggressive. It's got slimmer line headlights that are a bit higher up than before. Even those sort of vents down the side are sort of filled with that hexagonal shape as well. It's sort of that honeycomb thing that Audi is going for, even with its more sporty cars now. There's also new badging. These rings are a little bit more 2D than before. They're not that sort of silver 3D sort of traditional badge you used to get. And then down the bottom, there's also just a new shape for the bumper as well. It's all sort of a little bit less rounded, a little bit sharper, and brings the sort of whole front of the car into sort of the mid-2020s a little bit more than it was before. In terms of the interior design, you'd be pretty hard-pressed to point out many of the differences unless you actually owned a pre-facelift Q7. But in terms of the functionality, there are a few new things that sort of make this car just a little bit easier to live with and drive. For example, the actual multimedia in this main sort of screen here has some third-party apps now and is a little bit more customizable. But fortunately, you've still got those big, chunky, visible buttons that are easy to press, and there's that haptic feedback so that you know when you have pressed it. As well as that, you've also got some of the shortcuts for sort of the main big dog functions like your media, your nav, your phone, all those sorts of things that you might need to use the most. Below that, there's still this sort of dedicated climate control screen, which has a few other functions, but for the most part, it's controlling the temperature of the air, heated seats, things like that. As well as that, in front of you, the driver display remains pretty wide, pretty customizable. It's that sort of Audi cockpit that you've probably seen in the last decade or so. It does now have a safety animation that can sort of show you other cars, other road users in front of you. Plus, it still has sort of those little different ways you can set the screen out so that you've got the information you really need that's sort of biggest and clearest to you while you're driving. Another big deal is that there are still plenty of physical buttons, which for me is massive because I know this isn't a new generation, but they do seem to be slowly disappearing from car interiors. And it just makes everything a lot easier to live with. You've got buttons for the drive select, buttons for things like some safety features, some of the climate controls, and even the steering wheel is sort of covered in these nice big, easy to use buttons. Physically, in terms of the space in here though, like spacious is an understatement in terms of how much room you feel like you have, but then when it comes to storage, it's at a little bit of a premium in some weird ways for a car this big. You've got, the usual cup holders here and the door card water bottle holders, but you've kind of got not a lot of space in this center console where the phone charger is. Even though this is sort of nicely adjustable for your elbow, it sort of seems odd that there's not a deep bin for storage there. In terms of the second row, it feels actually even more spacious than the driver's seat, not only because there's not that center console, but these seats are actually really adjustable. You can move them back and forward. Even the middle one has its own adjustment, and you can do things like set it sort of to an angle so that you're as comfortable as you need to be on a long trip. These seats also do completely flip forward so that if you wanted to get into the third row, which has electrically adjustable seats, you can sort of step in without having to climb over something. The other thing from the interior is that because of this massive panoramic sunroof, it feels really airy and open in here, even though the interior is this kind of quite nice and subtle dark grey colour. It feels like it's not too dark, it's quite nice and light, and the whole interior just sort of feels like everyone has their own like little corner of the car, which is quite nice. The second row also does get that extra bit of functionality of having separate controls for each side. So you've got your own vent, your own temperature and fan controls, plus you've got heated seats on either outboard seat here in the second row as well. So there's a third row on the Q7 as standard, and they electrically fold up and down, but getting into them, like I said, isn't too big a task. I'm just going to show you now so that you can see what it looks like when an adult, who is an extremely average height, has to climb in and sort of pull the seat up. We did it. Okay. I could have a little bit more knee room back here. These seats do move a bit further forward though. So if everyone was being kind to the third row, I feel like an adult could actually comfortably sit here in the back seat for a little longer than you might think. It's not the most spacious, and you do sort of miss out on some of that extra light from the sunroof, but if it comes down to it, you could sort of fill this car with adults and still be pretty comfortable for a short trip.
There are 4 drivetrains in the Q7 lineup, 2 diesels and 2 petrols. The most affordable option is the 45 TFSI, which runs a 2-litre 4-cylinder turbo petrol engine, making 185 kilowatts and 370 newton meters. Like all variants in the Q7 range, the 45 TFSI engine powers all 4 wheels via an 8-speed automatic transmission. The rest of the lineup is, however, powered by different versions of the brand's 3-litre V6, all turbocharged and all with 48-volt mild hybrid tech aiming to increase efficiency. The 45 TDI is, as you may know, a turbo diesel 3-litre V6 that makes 170 kilowatts and 500 newton meters. The 50 TDI is also powered by a turbo diesel unit, but as the name suggests, it's more powerful. This one puts out 210 kilowatts and 600 newton meters. Finally, the 55 TFSI makes 250 kilowatts and 500 newton meters and runs on petrol.
So the updated Q7 doesn't look or function that differently to the way it did before, and that goes for the way it drives as well. It's not a massively different car from behind the wheel, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. Of course, there are some tweaks to the drivetrains and the hybridization of it all, but generally, when you're actually steering the car and driving around even just in traffic or on, faster winding roads, the Q7 still holds up as a car that's just really capable despite its, pretty significant size and weight. Like a lot of the tech in the car and the actual physical way that the seats work and things like that, the car's pretty customizable to be kind of what you need it to be at the time. Sure, it's never going to be a hot hatch or a tiny little city car, but you can sort of swap around the settings between, say, being just a big, comfortable cruiser for the highway with the suspension set to soft and the drivetrain all kind of just set to cruise along and be a little bit efficient. But at the same time, you can stiffen up the air suspension a little bit and let it get a little bit more aggressive when it comes to things like its power delivery. And that's not to say this version or any of them really are massively powerful, but you kind of get a little bit more out of it than you think you might for a massive 7-seater SUV. The suspension in its softest setting sort of does give you enough feedback to let you know what's going on underneath the car without being too sort of like jostly or letting too much of sort of those imperfect road surfaces get into the cabin. But it's also not completely numb. As well, if you set the drive mode to dynamic, you get a little bit more of a sense of what's going on underneath you, but again, it's not too full on. It's not like you're driving a sports car. You do still feel pretty comfortable and like you've just got a little layer of separation from the roughness of the surface underneath you. And it does handle rough surfaces pretty well. The air suspension, even, aside from its capability to change the nature of the way it works, is pretty good at soaking up some of those big bumps that you might expect in sort of back roads in Australia or even around suburbs where you've got things like tram tracks. Another big help for the Q7 is the standard rear wheel steering, which helps it feel a lot more nimble at low speeds in car parks in terms of the maneuverability you might need for small spaces. But at the same time, it does feel a lot more stable at high speeds on the highway or around twisty roads, sort of if you might be driving around in the countryside. If I had to level a criticism at the Q7, I would probably say that in some cases, especially when you might want it to be a little bit more aggressive, its gearbox could be a little bit more intuitive, but it does have paddle shifters for you to kind of take control of the gear selection yourself. But really, when it comes down to it, the Q7 is a really capable thing, and again, despite its size and weight, it can probably do a little bit more than you would expect. It's also important to note that its safety systems and the active safety that sometimes in some cars can be a little bit annoying with the way it sort of interrupts your drive are all pretty well tuned, and none of them really jump out at you unless there is actually something going on that the car needs to let you know about. I've only had it let me know that it feels like I should be sort of more in control of the steering wheel once or twice.
As you might expect, the diesel versions of the Q7 are claimed to use less fuel than their petrol counterparts, so let's start with those. The 45 TDI boasts a claimed 7 litres per 100 Ks consumption figure, while the 50 TDI is a little higher at 7.1 litres. Both of those have 75 litre fuel tanks and should therefore theoretically get more than 1,000 Ks out of a fill. Onto the petrol models, the 4-cylinder 45 TFSI has a claimed 9.3 litres per 100 Ks, and the 55 TFSI a 9 litre per 100 Ks figure. The Q7 is a 5-star car according to ANCAP, but the list of safety features is dozens long. There are more details at the full review on our website, but the highlights include things like adaptive cruise assist, lane assist and side assist, surround view cameras, and new traffic sign recognition, plus warnings for things like approaching cyclists. It's all handled through radars, cameras, and sensors, and when you're on the road, it's all relatively unobtrusive, which is a plus. Audi's 5-year unlimited kilometre warranty is pretty standard for a premium brand, but 5 years of free roadside assist and the ability to add a package to extend that and the warranty both add a little extra to the deal. Overall, changes to the Q7 aren't revolutionary, but that's okay because it was already a pretty fantastic large SUV. The fact Audi has kept the price around the same mark and introduced a cheaper entry grade should be welcome news to prospective buyers. But even the existing variants are capable and impressive family haulers, and now they're just that little bit better.